Hello everyone, my name is Jason, aka Bacon Chest, coach of the St Kilda Serperiors. Welcome to the ICBA D-League Season 2. This is going to be my draft analysis video, where we're going to be going over the squad that we drafted. A few things before we get into this. I'll just talk briefly about the draft rules. This was a tiered draft, which is different to last season I should say, where it was a point-style draft. The distinction between this style of tiering and other styles is that there was an A and a B tier for pretty much every tier except for maybe tier 4. This was to allow for a bit more flexibility with what you could do with your 400 free points after you'd had your tier 1, tier 2, 2 tier 3s, tier 4, tier 5, and your mega, which comes to the second distinction, which is that you could take one S tier or a mega. The S tiers included a lot of very, very powerful mons, particularly mons that had been unbanned from the Ubers tier. There were a lot of those kind of mons available. You can see one of them at the bottom of your screen. So, going into this draft, what were a few things that I wanted to do? I wanted to get some Pokemon that I hadn't tried before. Particularly, I wanted to use some Pokemon with, you know, a bit more bulk and a bit less speed. Which, you know, was something I kind of struggled with last season, was that I didn't necessarily have enough solid switch-ins to things. I wanted to try some of the new defoggers, just because there are so many of them. And crucially, though, I wanted to pick up a Rapid Spinner, because I figured... excuse me. I figured in the age of increased defog, that Rapid Spinners would be a little bit more valuable, especially if you do draft some Spikes users or some good Stealth Rock users and you want to be able to break down opposing teams. So, you can kind of see, if you look at this, that we managed to achieve all those things. In the process of picking up that bulk, however, we did pick up a few 4x weaknesses. So you can see on your screen that our draft comprises Garchomp, Heatran, Kommo-o, Dhelmise, Primarina, Tornadus Incarnate, Lycanroc Dayform, Drapion, Meloetta, Rotom Frost, and Deoxys Speed Form. And you can see that those first 3 mons give us 3 4x weaknesses, and obviously that's a little bit of an issue. Thankfully they're all different 4x weaknesses, so we're not like really stacked in that respect. But I do feel like I've covered Ice and Ground really well with my team. Obviously we only have the one Fairy Resist in Heatran, which is a little bit problematic, but we do... The thing with Fairy is that obviously it's a lot rarer as a typing. There's no hidden power Fairy, which helps out a lot in terms of, you know, not getting bopped by unexpected Fairy moves. And, you know, obviously Heatran is a pretty amazing Fairy Resist, given it resists 4 times, given that Fairies often have things like Psychic coverage, which can't really take it. It can obviously run like Choppleberry or Suckerberry to potentially live, you know, Tech, Earth Powers, or Focus Blasts, and realistically it's a Heatran. It's so bulky that it lives Hidden Powers for most things anyway, so yeah, I'm not too worried about that. Let's go over the individual mons that we drafted and why we drafted them. I'm gonna do this in a slightly haphazard order, just this order is based on what was in the draft document, but not obviously the order in which I drafted things. We did start with Deoxys Speed, and I wanted to build the team a little bit around Deoxys Speed. I think Deoxys Speed is really cool. It obviously, with 180 base speed, fastest thing in the game, it's incredibly difficult to outspeed, even with Choice Scarfers, which is just really, really handy. So that's a really good start. Pure Psychic typing is pretty good defensively, which is nice. You know, obviously only having those 3 weaknesses, and it gives me a lot of flexibility. It has setup options, it can set up hazards, it has really good coverage, it hits on both physical and special sides, and it's a great Z nuke. By which I mean its immediate power is not that great, but because it gets such good coverage and gets really powerful coverage, like things like Superpower, things like Ice Beam and Thunderbolt, then you can run Z moves and really bop any like potential responses to this thing. So I'm really looking forward to using Deoxys. I have made it one of my Z users, as you can see, and yeah, I really like how it gives me access to Spikes. It also gives me a priority user, which is nice. We don't have a huge amount of priority on this team, but Extreme speed is obviously pretty much the best priority move in the game, so that's really handy to have. So, let's move on to a few of the other ones. So, we picked up Garchomp and Heatran. Those were, I think, our next 2 picks. But the key there was that I felt that they matched really well together. And that was because, obviously, Garchomp can tank ground hits reasonably well. Obviously, doesn't resist them, but you know, it's not necessarily too worried about most ground types because they tend to have that kind of Edgequake combo, which obviously Stone Edge doing nothing to a Garchomp. And then Heatran can obviously take those Ice type hits, it can take those Fairy type hits, it can take Dragon type hits that are meant for Garchomp. So that's really, really handy. Really good there. The other thing that Heatran obviously does is it tanks Bug type attacks that are meant for Deoxys, which is good, and they can both tank Dark and Ghost type attacks, which is also good for Deoxys. You know, obviously, like, in a lot of circumstances, we don't necessarily have... we actually ended up with a good array of resists against most types. I was looking at, I think there's like maybe 3 types where we don't have at least 3 resists, or maybe 5. But anyway, like, we have a lot of resist to most typings in the game. But more importantly, I also just wanted to have really good neutral responses, so really good neutral checks to things. And Garchomp and Heatran provide that. Both of them give me rocks as well, so we drafted a lot of Stealth Rock users on this team, like, not necessarily hugely deliberately, just as a function of the fact that we picked up some mons that I thought were really good. And yeah, obviously that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of my opponents not necessarily knowing what's going to be offensive, what's going to be defensive. We can run things like Scarf Heatran or Specs Heatran. We can run Z, because we have given it a Z move. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that kind of flexibility that we've got in terms of what's running hazards, what's running removal, that kind of thing. But yeah, Garchomp and Heatran form the basis of a kind of defensive and offensive core, which is really nice. We also picked up Kommo-o. Kommo-o was a little bit of a speculative later round pick, but the thing that I really like about it is it gives me a Dragon Dance Sweeper, which I didn't have at that point. And it gives me a Fighting type Mon, which is nice for obviously dark moves that want to target Deoxys. And yeah, with its access to close combat, the fact that it can run Autotomize with the special set, the fact that I've given it Z moves, so I can do things like Z Focus Blast or Z Close Combat, which will just absolutely nuke things. Yeah, I'm really happy with Kommo-o. The fact that it does get Flash Cannon on the special set to take down fairies. You know, I'm not like hugely worried about its capacity to have coverage, particularly with Z move options. Again, another Stealth Rocker, which is nice. I wasn't actually sure that it got Stealth Rocks when I drafted it, but it does as of Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, so that's really cool. We then picked up a few sort of bulkier, more like utility role-based mons. So we've got things like Delmise, Primarina, Drapion, Rotom Frost. Rotom Frost was really, really important because it glues together this team really well because it gives me a Bolt Beam switch in and a ground immunity at the same time. So all 3 of those are really, really handy. Obviously, it gives me, like, it's another Ice Resist to cover Garchomp, it's another ground immunity to cover Heatran. It's reasonably bulky, it gets Defog now, which obviously it's weak to rocks, so it's not the best Defogger, but it does give me another Defog option. And, you know, obviously Bolt Beam, the fact that I'm worried about resisting it is also indicative of the fact that it's a good offensive combination, and remains a good offensive combination in this generation. So that's really handy. So we picked that thing up. Primarina is something I've used extensively in the ABA and really enjoyed using. It's just so fat, but also so powerful. Like, Choice Specs can just put in so much work against a lot of teams. And Assault Vest can take a lot of hits, so I really, really like Primarina. I'm really looking forward to using it. Delmise is something I haven't used before. I haven't tended to use many Rapid Spinners, and I haven't tended to use Grass types, but I have been having a little bit of fun with Decidueye in the PSPC D-League that I'm currently playing in. And I figured Delmise is, you know, like obviously has the same typing, does different things in terms of being probably a little bit more of an offensive threat, and obviously a bit slower, but lacking that momentum. But Rapid Spin is really cool. The fact that it's also a spin blocker is quite handy. And yeah, I'm looking forward to potentially, I mean, obviously Assault Vest tends to be the set that you see just so it can tank hits and, you know, still do its job as a Rapid Spinner, but we'll see if we can, you know, potentially heat that up a little bit as the season goes on. We've also picked up some, and the last mon among that kind of grouping is probably Drapion. So Drapion gives me T-Spikes, which is really handy against some teams. They can just be incredibly useful for getting off poison on things like Rapid Spinners, like Blastoise, or, you know, just other kind of bulky fat mons that this team might otherwise struggle a little bit to break, given that we don't have a huge amount of immediate power outside of things like Garchomp, Primarina, and Heatran, I suppose. Like, we don't have a huge, like, it's not the most powerful offensive team I've ever drafted. I'm hoping that I've made up for that with a fair bit of utility, a lot of hazards, and good hazard control, and the fact that we have some pretty cool setup opportunities, but we'll see how that goes. And yeah, and obviously, yeah, Drapion can help out with that. It's obviously a good Psychic switch-in. We have a lot of good Psychic switch-ins, frankly. But it's also a Dark and Ghost switch-in, which is obviously, again, really, really handy for Deoxys. Then we've got a few more offensive ones. So, Lycanroc Day, Tornadus, Incarnate, and Meloetta. Meloetta, obviously, with that Pirouette form. We've just got so many forms on this team. Like, what, like Tornadus, Lycanroc, Meloetta, Rotom, and Deoxys. Like, that's like almost half the team can have forms or are forms, which is kind of fun. But yeah, then we've picked up some like niche offensive ones. So Tornadus, obviously I've used this before on this channel. I love this one. The fact that it now gets Prankster Defog is amazing, and the fact that if I'm worried about my opponent bringing a Dark type to block that Prankster Defog, I could run Defiant, for example, and you know, obviously that's totally fine. If we get to like Defiant Defog on a Magic Bounce user at some point, that would be incredible just for that like attack boost. That'd be really fun. But you know, like, wait, no, would that actually work? I don't know. Anyway, regardless, I really like Tornadus Eye. Has amazing coverage, can run physical or special set, which you can see we've got with a few of our mons on this team, like Como, Tornadus, Meloetta can obviously very distinct physical and special sets, and Deoxys as well. All really, really good, even things like Garchomp, and, you know, to a lesser extent Heatran, can run like physical, or special or physical moves respectively, in order to take down specific threats, so that's pretty cool. Lycanroc was really important because it gave us another source of priority. Excel Rock is a really, really cool move that I'm really looking forward to taking advantage of. Obviously, a nice check for things like Charizard and Volcarona that have 4 times weaknesses to Rock. Rock is, you know, a pretty solid offensive typing, particularly in combination with Normal, given that Rock is, well, I mean, I suppose Steel is therefore the resist to that, but like, I feel like we have, you know, reasonably good responses to Steel types in the forms of Garchomp, Heatran, and Komodo, all being reasonably solid in that respect. And then Meloetta was just a very late round pick where I looked and thought I really need a normal type so that I have an immunity to Ghost, because as it was, I was otherwise pretty much going to have to bring Drapion every time I saw that my opponent had a decent offensive Ghost type, and I didn't necessarily want to be forced into bringing Drapion every time. Meloetta is really cool because obviously, yeah, it can be a really, really bulky, you know, switch in for things like Ghost types, for things like Psychic types, but it can also be a setup sweeper with Relic Song and then Close Combat plus Return. It can be a really tricksy mon because it can also carries a U-turn, which is really, really useful, and it can also be a Cleric. It gets Heal Bell, which I didn't actually realize when I drafted it, but it does, so that's cool. So yeah, that gives us some handy support and utility. which for a late round pick, which was I believe a tier 4, which is just like a little bit underpriced, but I'm not going to complain about that. So yeah, that's the squad. I'm feeling reasonably confident with it. I was a bit unsure of it when I was drafting, but I'm looking at it now and I'm thinking, yep, we've got reasonably good responses to all of our weaknesses. We've got a lot of access to hazards. We have everything except for Sticky Web, which, I'm not too worried about. We have Prankster Tailwind, which can potentially set things up for Heatran, Komodo, even Primarina is could be a bit of an offensive threat with Prankster Tailwind. We've got, emergency defog. We've got like 3 decent hazard removal options, and even then, like, our team's not particularly weak to hazards. Like, we've got Tornadus and Roto are the only mons we have that are weak to hazards, so that's really good. And yeah, like, I'm really looking forward to this season. It's going to be 12 teams as opposed to 16 last time, just to make it a bit tighter and a bit easier to run. Should be really fun. Uploads are going to be going up on Saturday, as I believe I mentioned in my ABA Grand Final video. Go check that out if you haven't already. It was a really fun game, and a really cool way to end off that league. And yeah, I think that's about it. So until next time, peace.